I thought I had the perfect family. Every Sunday dinner, we'd gather around Mom's old oak table, the one Dad refused to replace even after the legs started wobbling. Marcus would bring his wife Sarah and their twin boys. Jennifer would drive down from Boston with her latest boyfriend, and me? I was already there. I was always there. "Rebecca's such a blessing," Dad would say, patting my hand while Marcus carved the roast. "I don't know what I'd do without my little caregiver." Everyone would smile and nod, like it was the most natural thing in the world that I'd given up my marketing career at 32 to move back home when Dad's Parkinson's diagnosis came. "It's temporary," I'd told myself back then, "just until we figure out a care plan." That was 15 years ago. The house felt different now, heavier somehow, filled with the constant hum of medical equipment and the sharp scent of disinfectant that never quite masked the smell of slow decline. Dad's tremors had gotten worse over the years, and what started as helping with medications had evolved into full-time nursing, cooking, cleaning, and pretending I didn't notice how my siblings' visits had shifted from weekly to monthly to whenever we can make it, but they always made it for the important conversations. "Rebecca, honey," Jennifer said last Christmas, her voice dripping with that condescending tone she'd perfected in law school. "You know how much we appreciate everything you do for Dad, but have you thought about what happens after?" I was loading the dishwasher, my hands deep in soapy water, when she cornered me. Marcus stood in the doorway, blocking my exit, a lawyer trick Jennifer had probably taught him. "After what?" I asked, though my stomach already knew. "Well, you've been living here rent-free for so long," Marcus chimed in, straightening his expensive tie. "And Dad's been covering all your expenses, medical bills, groceries, utilities. You've essentially been invested in heavily." The plate slipped from my hands, clattering against the metal sink. "Invested in?" "What Marcus means," Jennifer said smoothly, "is that you've already received so much. When Dad's gone, it wouldn't be fair to expect more, would it? I mean, we have families to support, college funds to think about." I dried my hands slowly, buying time while my mind raced. "Are you saying—" "We're saying Dad loves you," Marcus interrupted, "but he loves all of us. And he's always been fair." Fair. The word tasted bitter. Was it fair that I'd missed Sarah Chin's wedding because Dad had pneumonia? Was it fair that I'd turned down the promotion to regional manager because Dad needed someone to drive him to his specialist appointments 3 times a week? Was it fair that my own marriage had crumbled because David couldn't compete with my father's trembling hands and my misplaced sense of duty? But I swallowed the words. I always swallowed the words. "Of course," I whispered. "Dad's always been fair." Jennifer's smile was razor sharp. "I'm so glad you understand. Some people might get greedy in a situation like this, but you're not like that, are you, Rebecca?" That night, I lay in my childhood bedroom, the one with the princess wallpaper I'd never bothered to change, and stared at the ceiling. Down the hall, I could hear Dad's labored breathing through the baby monitor I kept by my bedside. Every pause between breaths made my heart skip, wondering if this would be the night. The conversation started happening more frequently after that. Hushed phone calls that stopped when I entered the room. Marcus and Jennifer visiting together, which never happened before, always finding excuses to step onto the back porch or take walks around the block. And Dad started looking at me differently. Guilty almost, like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. "Rebecca," he managed one evening while I was helping him with his evening medications. His voice was clearer than it had been in months. "You know I love you, don't you?" "Of course, Dad." I counted out the pills, 2 blue ones for tremors, 1 white one for blood pressure, the little yellow one that was supposed to slow the progression but never seemed to work. "And you know your brother and sister love you too?" Something cold settled in my stomach. "Dad, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. I want you to know that everything I've done, everything I'm going to do, it's because I love you. All of you." But his eyes wouldn't meet mine, and his hands shook worse than usual as he reached for the water glass. The next morning, Jennifer showed up with coffee and legal documents. "Just some estate planning," she said breezily, settling at the kitchen table like she belonged there. "Dad's lawyer recommended updating everything, making sure it's all clear and legal. You understand, right?" We don't want any confusion later. Marcus arrived an hour later, and they spent the afternoon in Dad's study with the door closed. I could hear voices through the thin walls. Dad's weak protests, Jennifer's firm responses, Marcus adding his weight to whatever argument they were making. When they emerged, Dad looked exhausted and defeated. "All done," Jennifer announced, kissing Dad's forehead. "Now, you don't have to worry about anything, Dad. Everything's taken care of." That night, I found Dad crying in his chair, staring at a photograph of Mom. "Dad? What's wrong?" "I'm a coward, Rebecca," he whispered, a tired, sick old coward. "Don't say that. You're the strongest man I know." He laughed, but it sounded like breaking glass. Strong men don't let their children manipulate them. Strong men protect the ones who've actually been there. "What do you mean?" But he just shook his head and asked me to help him to bed. The visits became a pattern after that. Marcus and Jennifer would arrive together, always with some excuse, updating insurance policies, organizing financial documents, discussing Dad's wishes. They'd closet themselves with him for hours while I maintained my routine. Medications, meals, physical therapy, doctor's appointments. The endless, grinding routine that had become my life. "Rebecca," Marcus said one afternoon, finding me folding laundry in the basement. "We need to talk." I looked up from Dad's undershirts. Too many undershirts for a man who barely left his bedroom anymore. "About what?" "About your expectations." "My expectations?" "Jennifer and I have been talking, and we're worried you might have some unrealistic ideas about the future." I set down the shirt I was folding. "Oh, what kind of ideas?" "Well, you've been here so long, it might be easy to start thinking of this place as yours. But Rebecca, you have to understand, this isn't your house. Dad's been incredibly generous, letting you live here all these years, but when he's gone..." Marcus spread his hands like he was explaining something to a child. "Well, there are 3 of us, and some of us have actual families to support." The words hit like physical blows. "Actual families?" "You know what I mean. Children, responsibilities. You've essentially been on an extended vacation here." "A vacation?" My voice cracked. "Marcus, I haven't taken a day off in 15 years. I haven't been on an actual vacation since..." "Come on, Rebecca. You've had free room and board, no rent, no utilities, all your food paid for. Dad's essentially been supporting you completely. That's got to be worth something, right?" I stared at my brother, really looked at him. When had his face become so cold? When had his eyes started calculating the worth of every conversation? "You think I've been freeloading," I said slowly. "I think you've been very comfortable, and comfort can make people forget that nothing lasts forever." That evening, I sat with Dad during his dinner. He'd barely touched his soup, and his hands were shaking too badly to hold the spoon properly. "Let me help," I said, reaching for the spoon. "Rebecca, stop." His voice was stronger than it had been in weeks. I looked up, surprised. "Stop taking care of me for just 1 minute and listen." His eyes were clearer too, more focused than I'd seen them in months. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it." "Okay, Dad." "Your brother and sister, they think they're so smart. They think they've convinced an old man to do what they want." My heart started pounding. "Dad, what did you do?" "What I should have done 15 years ago." "See," he reached across the table and took my hand with both of his shaking ones. "I'm not as helpless as they think I am, sweetheart. And I'm not as stupid as they hope I am." "I don't understand." "You will. When the time comes, you'll understand everything." 3 weeks later, Dad was gone. The call came at 4:17 a.m. I remember because I was already awake, listening to his breathing through the monitor and trying to convince myself that the pauses weren't getting longer. When the silence stretched too long, I knew. I found him peaceful in his bed, looking younger somehow without the constant tension of pain. I sat with him for an hour before calling anyone, just holding his still warm hand and trying to memorize his face without the mask of illness he'd worn for so long. The funeral home came first, then the relatives, then the circus began. Marcus took charge immediately, making phone calls and arrangements like he'd been handling Dad's affairs all along instead of visiting twice a month with increasingly transparent motives. Jennifer flew in from Boston with her black designer dress and her practiced funeral face, the one she'd probably perfected during law school moot court. "Such a blessing that it was peaceful," she murmured to the steady stream of visitors who came to pay their respects. "And Rebecca was so wonderful, taking care of him all these years. We're so grateful she could be there at the end." Grateful, like I was a hired nurse who'd done her job well. The visitation was surreal. People I barely remembered from childhood came to share stories about Dad that I'd never heard. Mrs. Henderson from across the street talked about how Dad had quietly paid for her grandson's school supplies every year after her daughter died. Tom Bradley from Dad's old accounting firm mentioned the college fund Dad had secretly established for Tom's disabled son. "Your father was a generous man," person after person told me. "You must be so proud." I was proud. But with each story, I felt more and more like a stranger in my own grief. These weren't the stories Marcus and Jennifer were telling. Their version of Dad was simpler, a loving father who'd done his best to provide equally for all his children. The day of the funeral, I woke up in my childhood bedroom for what I somehow knew would be the last time. The house felt hollow already, like it was holding its breath. I could hear Marcus and Jennifer moving around downstairs, their voices carrying the efficient tone of people dividing assets. I put on the black dress I'd bought specifically for this day, my first new dress in 3 years, and tried to prepare myself for saying goodbye. The funeral home was packed. Dad had touched more lives than I'd realized. I sat in the front row between Marcus and Jennifer, feeling isolated despite being surrounded by people. The pastor spoke about Dad's devotion to family, his generosity, his faith. But every word felt like it was about a stranger. After the service, we gathered in the basement of St. Mary's for the traditional funeral lunch. Ham sandwiches and potato salad, coffee in paper cups, and the low murmur of people sharing memories. I moved through it like a ghost, accepting condolences and hugs from people whose names I'd forgotten. That's when I heard Marcus talking to our cousin Paul near the coffee table. "Well, the house will need to be sold, of course," Marcus was saying. "Property values in that neighborhood have really improved. Should get a good price." "What about Rebecca?" Paul asked. "Where will she go?" Marcus glanced around, then lowered his voice. I was standing close enough to hear, but he didn't seem to notice me. "Rebecca will be fine. She's had 15 years of free living. That's worth more than most people inherit. Besides, she never contributed anything financially. Dad always said she was more of a burden than a help toward the end. The medical expenses, the modifications to the house, the constant supervision he needed. It was getting expensive." The words hit me like ice water. I set down my coffee cup with shaking hands. "A burden?" Paul sounded shocked. "Don't get me wrong, we appreciate that she was available." Jennifer's voice joined the conversation. "But let's be honest, what else was she going to do? She'd given up any real career prospects years ago. This was really her only option." "And now?" "Now she'll have to figure it out like everyone else," Marcus said. "Maybe this will motivate her to actually make something of herself." I backed away from the conversation, my face burning with humiliation. Around me, people continued eating sandwiches and sharing fond memories of my father, while his own children discussed my future like I was a problem to be solved. I escaped to the bathroom and locked the door, staring at myself in the harsh fluorescent light. My face looked older than my 47 years, worn down by exhaustion and stress and the constant low-level anxiety of being responsible for another person's life. When had I become so invisible? When had I started accepting that my own siblings could discuss disposing of me like an inconvenient piece of furniture? By the time I returned to the reception, the crowd had thinned. Marcus and Jennifer were holding court near the coffee table, accepting condolences with the practiced grace of people who'd been preparing for this day. They were the successful siblings after all, Marcus with his law practice and big house in the suburbs, Jennifer with her corporate law career and expensive suits. I was just the sister who'd never left home. "Rebecca," Jennifer called out as I approached, "we need to talk about arrangements for tomorrow." "Arrangements?" "The will reading," Marcus said. Dad's lawyer wants to meet at the office at 10 a.m. Just family. Of course. And Rebecca? Jennifer's voice carried a warning tone. I hope you understand that tomorrow is just a formality. Dad was very clear about his wishes. He didn't want any misunderstandings or hurt feelings. Marcus nodded gravely. He was always worried about fairness. You know how much he valued that. I looked at my siblings, really looked at them. They were so confident, so sure of themselves and their version of events. They'd convinced themselves that their occasional visits and phone calls made them equal participants in Dad's care. They'd rewritten 15 years of history to make their absence seem reasonable, and my presence seem opportunistic. I understand, I said quietly, but as the words left my mouth, I realized I was lying. I didn't understand anything anymore. I didn't understand how the family I'd sacrificed everything for could see me as a burden. I didn't understand how 15 years of daily care could be dismissed as freeloading. I didn't understand how my own siblings could stand at our father's funeral and discuss my worthlessness like they were planning a dinner menu. What I did understand was that I was completely, utterly alone. That night, I sat in Dad's empty bedroom, surrounded by the medical equipment I'd lived with for so long it had become invisible. The hospital bed, the oxygen concentrator, the pill organizers, the shower chair, all the unglamorous necessities of caring for someone whose body was slowly betraying them. Tomorrow, I would sit in a lawyer's office and learn exactly how little my sacrifice had meant. Tomorrow, I would discover whether Dad's final act would be to validate his other children's version of events or to acknowledge the daughter who'd given up her life for his. Tomorrow, I would find out if love was really measured in years of presence or in the ability to afford expensive gifts and impressive careers. But tonight, I allowed myself to grieve, not just for Dad, but for the family I'd thought I belonged to, and for the woman I might have been if I'd been brave enough to choose myself instead of duty. The law office of Peterson Williams and Associates occupied the third floor of a granite building downtown that smelled like old leather and disappointment. I arrived 10 minutes early, wearing the same black dress from the funeral because it was the only decent outfit I owned that still fit. 15 years of stress eating and no money for new clothes had left me with limited options. Marcus and Jennifer were already there, sitting in matching leather chairs like they'd coordinated their arrival. Marcus wore his most expensive suit, the one he'd bought for court appearances, while Jennifer had chosen a navy blue power dress that probably cost more than I'd spent on clothes in the past 5 years combined. "Rebecca," Jennifer said with a tight smile, "right on time." Mr. Peterson emerged from his office, a tall, silver-haired man who'd been Dad's lawyer for over 20 years. I remembered him from my parents' wedding anniversary parties, back when Mom was alive and our family gatherings were actually celebrations instead of strategic meetings. "Please come in," he said, gesturing toward his office. "I know this is difficult for all of you." His office walls were lined with law books and family photos, grandchildren at baseball games, vacation pictures from places that required passports. The kind of life I'd imagined having someday, back when I thought my sacrifice was temporary. "Before we begin," Mr. Peterson said, settling behind his mahogany desk, "I want you to know that your father spent considerable time on his estate planning. This wasn't done hastily or without thought." Marcus leaned forward. "We understand, Mr. Peterson. Dad was always thorough." "Indeed." Mr. Peterson opened a thick file folder. "However, before we review the written will, your father left specific instructions that you watch a video message he recorded." My heart stopped. "A video?" "Yes. He was quite insistent that this be played before any documents were read." Mr. Peterson reached for a USB drive sitting on his desk. "He recorded this about 6 months ago, when his symptoms were relatively manageable. He wanted to ensure his thoughts were clearly expressed." Jennifer's composure cracked slightly. "That seems unusual." "Your father was an unusual man," Mr. Peterson replied, inserting the USB into his computer. "He understood that his illness might affect people's perceptions of his mental capacity, so he wanted to create a record when his mind was completely clear." The large monitor on his wall flickered to life, and suddenly Dad was there, not the frail, trembling man from his final weeks, but a version I barely remembered. His voice was strong, his hands steady, his eyes sharp with the intelligence that Parkinson's had slowly stolen. "If you're watching this," Dad's voice filled the room, "then I'm gone, and you're all sitting in Bill Peterson's office wondering what the old man decided to do with his worldly possessions." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Jennifer's face had gone pale. Rebecca was right. Those were his first 3 words, and they hit the room like a physical force. I felt tears spring to my eyes immediately, not just because of what he'd said, but because his voice was so clear, so definitively him. Rebecca was right about everything. She was right to move home when I got sick. She was right to put her life on hold to take care of me. She was right when she said Marcus and Jennifer would only visit when they wanted something. And she was right to stay quiet when they started their little campaign to convince me she was taking advantage of my generosity. Jennifer made a small sound, like air escaping from a punctured tire. "You see, children, I may have been sick, but I wasn't deaf." I heard every phone call about how Rebecca was getting too comfortable. I heard every conversation about fair distribution and equal inheritance. I heard Marcus tell his wife that Rebecca had been freeloading for years and needed to learn some responsibility. I heard Jennifer explain to her boyfriend that I was probably developing dementia and couldn't be trusted to make rational decisions about my estate. My hands were shaking. In my peripheral vision, I could see Marcus staring at the screen with his mouth slightly open. But what you didn't hear were the conversations I had with Rebecca, the nights when the pain was so bad I wanted to give up, and she sat beside my bed reading to me until I could sleep. The mornings when my medications made me so nauseous I couldn't eat, and she found ways to make food I could keep down. The dozens of times she turned down social invitations, job opportunities, and personal relationships because I needed her. Dad paused, reaching for a glass of water that wasn't there anymore. For a moment, the illusion broke, and I remembered that this man was gone, that these were just recorded words from 6 months ago. "Rebecca never asked me for anything, not once in 15 years. She never hinted about inheritance or suggested that her sacrifice should be rewarded. When Marcus and Jennifer started their pressure campaign, she actually came to me and said she wanted to make sure I felt free to divide things however I thought was fair. She said she'd rather have had these years with me than any amount of money." Jennifer was crying now, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of recognition, the kind you cry when you realize you've been caught in something unforgivable. "Marcus, Jennifer, I love you both. You're my children, and nothing will ever change that. But love doesn't mean blindness. You became so focused on what you thought you deserved that you forgot about what Rebecca actually gave. You saw her presence as opportunism instead of devotion. You interpreted her silence as manipulation instead of selflessness." The camera angle shifted slightly, and I could see that Dad had positioned himself in his study, with Mom's portrait visible on the wall behind him. He'd chosen this setting deliberately, surrounded by family history and the memory of the woman who'd raised us to be better than this. "So here's what's going to happen. Rebecca, sweetheart, if you're watching this, I want you to know that every day you spent taking care of me was a gift. You gave up your career, your social life, your chances at marriage and children of your own, all to make sure an old man didn't have to die alone and afraid. That kind of love is rare, and it deserves to be honored." Mr. Peterson handed me a box of tissues. My face was wet with tears I didn't remember starting. "Marcus and Jennifer, you're both successful adults with careers and families and bright futures. You don't need my money to survive or thrive. Rebecca, on the other hand, sacrificed her future for my present. It's time to give that future back to her." The video continued for another 10 minutes. Dad detailed specific memories. The time I'd driven him to the emergency room at 2 a.m. when his breathing was labored, only to discover it was anxiety and not his heart. The Christmas when I'd canceled my plans to visit David's family because Dad had fallen and was too embarrassed to let Marcus and Jennifer know. The hundreds of small kindnesses that had made up the fabric of our daily life together. "I'm leaving the house and the majority of my assets to Rebecca," Dad concluded, "not because she asked for them, but because she earned them. Not through manipulation or convenience, but through 15 years of unconditional love." Marcus and Jennifer, you'll each receive $50,000, enough to acknowledge that you're my children, but not enough to make you think that occasional visits and holiday cards are equivalent to daily sacrifice. The video ended with Dad looking directly into the camera. Rebecca, don't you dare feel guilty about this. Don't let anyone convince you that you don't deserve it. You were the daughter who stayed, and now you get to be the daughter who's free. Use this freedom well, sweetheart. Make the life you put on hold for me. The monitor went black and the office fell into complete silence. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. The written will confirms everything your father just explained. The house at 412 Maple Street, along with all contents and approximately $340,000 in various accounts, goes to Rebecca Thompson. Marcus and Jennifer Thompson each receive $50,000 from a separate account established for this purpose. I couldn't speak. The numbers felt surreal, impossible. $340,000. The house. After years of worrying about what would happen to me, of accepting my siblings' narrative that I was a burden, I was suddenly secure. There's one more thing, Mr. Peterson continued. Your father also left instructions that if either Marcus or Jennifer contests this will, their inheritance is forfeited entirely and donated to the Parkinson's Foundation. Marcus found his voice first. This is ridiculous. Dad was clearly not in his right mind. Actually, Mr. Peterson interrupted smoothly, your father anticipated this response. That's why he had a full psychiatric evaluation done the same day he recorded the video. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a geriatric psychiatrist, examined him thoroughly and certified his mental competency. Her report is part of the file. Jennifer was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of shock, rage, and something that might have been respect. Rebecca, you must have known about this. I had no idea, I whispered, and it was the truth. I thought he agreed with you about me being a burden. A burden? Mr. Peterson looked genuinely confused. Your father talked about you constantly. He called you his blessing, his angel. He said watching you care for him taught him what love really looked like. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. 15 years of manipulation. 15 years of presence, I said, finding my voice. It came out stronger than I expected. 15 years of changing your diapers when the medications gave you diarrhea. 15 years of 4 a.m. doctor visits and insurance fights and watching you forget Mom's name sometimes. 15 years of putting my life on hold so you wouldn't have to put yours on pause for even a weekend. We visited. You visited when it was convenient, when there were no soccer games or business trips or social obligations that mattered more. You visited when you wanted to check up on your investment. Jennifer's professional composure finally cracked completely. How were we supposed to know Dad wanted us to sacrifice our careers like you did? We have responsibilities. And I didn't? The words came out like a roar, surprising all of us. You think I didn't want a career? You think I didn't want a husband and children and a life of my own? You think I chose this because I had nothing better to do? I stood up, and for the first time in years, I felt tall, strong, clear. I chose this because Dad was scared and alone, and someone needed to love him through the hardest part of his life. I chose this because when your parent is dying slowly, someone needs to make sure they know they matter. I chose this because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected a reward. The room fell silent again. Through the window, I could see people walking on the sidewalk below. People with normal lives and normal problems who weren't sitting in law offices discovering that their entire family dynamic had been built on lies. But now I'm choosing something else, I continued. I'm choosing to accept Dad's gift without guilt. I'm choosing to believe that love and sacrifice mean something, even when they're not convenient or profitable or impressive to strangers at cocktail parties. Marcus sat back down heavily. Rebecca, we never meant... Yes, you did. My voice was calm now, certain. You meant every word. You meant it when you called me a burden. You meant it when you said I was freeloading. You meant it when you tried to convince Dad that 15 years of my life were worth less than 2 successful careers that never required you to sacrifice anything meaningful. I turned to Mr. Peterson. What do I need to sign? He slid several documents across the desk. As I signed my name, Rebecca Thompson, homeowner, financially independent woman, I felt something shift inside my chest. It was like a weight I'd carried for so long that I'd forgotten it was there had suddenly lifted. The house keys, Mr. Peterson said, handing me a familiar ring. Though I suppose you already have those. I laughed, and it sounded strange in the formal office. I've had them for 15 years. I just never thought of it as my house. Well, he said gently, it is now. Outside the law office, Marcus and Jennifer waited by their cars. For a moment, we stood in an awkward triangle on the sidewalk, 3 siblings who no longer knew how to talk to each other. Rebecca, Jennifer said finally, I want you to know, we didn't realize— Yes, you did, I said again, but without anger this time. You realized exactly what you wanted to realize, and that's okay. People make choices based on what they value, and you valued your comfort more than my sacrifice. Dad understood that. That's why he made the choice he made. Marcus stepped forward. Maybe we could— family is family, right? Maybe we could work something out, talk about— Marcus. I looked at my brother, really looked at him. Do you know what I'm going to do with my inheritance? He shook his head. I'm going to live. For the first time in 15 years, I'm going to wake up in the morning and ask myself what I want to do with my day instead of what Dad needs me to do. I'm going to travel. I'm going to take classes. I'm going to date men who don't see me as a caregiver. I'm going to discover who Rebecca Thompson is when she's not defined by other people's needs. I unlocked my car. Dad's old Honda that would need to be replaced soon, another luxury I could now afford. And I'm going to do all of that, I continued, with people who see my value without needing a lawyer and a video recording to explain it to them. Jennifer was crying again. Rebecca, please, we're still family. I paused with my hand on the car door. You're right, we're still family, but Dad taught me something important in that video. Love isn't just blood relation, it's presence, it's sacrifice. It's showing up when it's hard and staying when it would be easier to leave. I got into the car and started the engine. Through the windshield, I could see my siblings standing together, probably realizing for the first time that they'd lost more than an inheritance. They'd lost their sister. But as I drove away, heading toward the house that was now legally mine, I didn't feel sad about that loss. I felt free. That evening, I sat in Dad's chair, my chair now, in the living room we'd shared for 15 years. The medical equipment was gone, removed by the hospice company that morning. Without the constant hum of machines, the house felt peaceful for the first time in years. I called my old college roommate Sarah, the one who'd been sending Christmas cards to Dad's address because she didn't know where else to find me. Rebecca? Her voice was surprised and delighted. Oh my God, I heard about your dad. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Sarah, I need to ask you something. Are you still working at that marketing firm in Portland? Yeah, why? Is there any chance they might have a position for someone with 15 years of life experience but a resume gap the size of the Grand Canyon? Sarah laughed. Honey, life experience is exactly what we need. When can you start? I looked around the living room, imagining it without the hospital bed, without the pill organizers and medical supplies that had defined our lives for so long. I imagined it with new furniture, bright colors, maybe some plants that weren't chosen specifically because they could survive in a house where no one had time to tend them properly. Give me a month, I said. I have some living to catch up on first. After I hung up, I sat in the growing darkness and thought about Dad's words. Rebecca was right. 3 simple words that had changed everything, that had given me back the future I'd thought was lost forever. Tomorrow, I would start the process of becoming myself again. I would figure out who Rebecca Thompson was at 47, what she wanted, where she belonged in a world that wasn't defined by someone else's illness. But tonight, I allowed myself to grieve, not for Dad, who'd found peace, and not for the siblings who'd chosen their comfort over our relationship. Tonight, I grieved for the 15 years I'd lost, and then I forgave myself for losing them. because love always costs something. The question isn't whether to pay the price, it's whether the love is real enough to make the payment worthwhile. Dad's love for me had been real. My love for him had been real. And now, finally, I was free to love myself enough to build a life worthy of the sacrifice we'd both made. The inheritance wasn't just money and property. It was permission to believe I deserved happiness, validation that my choices had mattered, and proof that sometimes the daughter who stays is the daughter who gets to start over. I was 47 years old, and my life was just beginning.